Yesterday, I asked you guys to give me your hot takes based on what we've seen so far this season. Now, today we're going to be reacting to some of those hot takes. As always, when it comes to these interactive videos, you guys killed it with the comments, so huge shout out and thank you to each and every one of you who left a comment on the post. Even if your comment isn't featured in this video, just know I read them all and I appreciate all of you guys. And if this is your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We are trying to hit 100,000 subscribers this NHL season. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off with the first hot take from Hugh Barker, who says the Predators become the next 2018-19 St. Louis Blues. I've been seeing a lot of people make this comparison, although it doesn't sound like Barry Trotz is even going to let things get that far. I don't think St. Louis started to turn things around that season until around January, and Barry Trotz has already came out and said that if Nashville doesn't turn things around soon, then he's going to start planning out the rebuild. Not really 100% sure what that entails. Does that mean if Nashville doesn't start winning soon, he's going to start trading guys away, or was this just something Barry Trotz said to try and light a fire under the team and really get them going? I do feel like before any trades have to happen, Nashville should try a coaching change. I'm not saying their performance this season is 100% on Andrew Brunette, but as we've seen in recent years, sometimes a coaching change is all it takes for a team to turn things around. A coaching change is something that St. Louis Blues team went through in the 2018-19 season before going on to win the Stanley Cup. The next hot take we have comes from The Last Bender, who says Cale Makar stays hot and wins both the Norris Trophy and the Hart Trophy, becoming the second to do so since Bobby Orr did and the first since 2000. I honestly don't think this is too crazy of a hot take. I could definitely see this happening. Cale Makar has been lighting it up so far this season. He is second in the NHL in scoring, only behind his teammate Nathan MacKinnon. As long as he stays healthy this season, I think he hits the 100-point mark easily. Now, obviously, the Norris Trophy shouldn't just by default go to the defenseman with the most points, but that's usually what ends up happening, especially if a defenseman hits that 100-point mark. They're likely going to win the Norris. We saw that with Erik Karlsson in 2023. The one argument I would make against Cale Makar potentially winning the Hart Trophy is the fact that Nathan MacKinnon is doing what he's doing, and he's on pace to have another ridiculous season, could end up with 150 plus points, and if that's what ends up happening and these two are able to drag the Avalanche to the playoffs, then I think there's a pretty good chance we just see MacKinnon win the Hart Trophy again. Either way though, very impressive what both MacKinnon and Cale Makar have been able to do so far this season, considering the supporting cast that's been around them. That roster is absolutely gutted and depleted with injuries right now and key players out of the lineup, so I feel like that makes what they're doing that much more impressive. Moving on now to the next hot take. This one comes from Jason, who says Alex Laferriere is legit and will maintain good pace and score 60 to 70 points for the Kings this season. Laferriere has quietly been one of the most underrated forwards in the entire NHL this season. The only forwards with more points than him at 5-on-5 are Alexander Ovechkin, Sam Reinhart, Kirill Kaprizov, Ivan Barbashev, Dylan Strome, and Nikita Kucherov. That being said, I do feel like 60 to 70 points might still be a bit of a long shot. I mean, this is a guy who only had 23 points in 81 games last season. Now, his ice time per game has jumped up over 2 full minutes from last season to this season, so that's obviously playing a role in him being a lot more productive. But a couple of things I look at that make me think this probably isn't the most sustainable is the fact that he's shooting 24% and he leads the LA Kings in PDO, so there's definitely been a bit of luck involved, but you still got to give credit where credit's due. He has been a very productive player, especially at even strength so far this season for the Kings. I'd be surprised if he's able to reach the 60 to 70 point mark, but maybe 40 to 50 points, I definitely think that's in play, and that would obviously still be very solid production from a guy who, again, only had 23 points in 81 games last season. The next hot take we have comes from Are You Not Entertained, who says 4 coaches will be fired before the regular season is over. This does feel like a lot, especially considering the fact that we saw 7 coaching changes in the NHL last season. So say there is 4 coaches that are fired this season, that would be 11 coaches the last 2 seasons that got canned. That's over 1/3 of the entire league, which would be pretty insane. I'm trying to think off the top of my head who are some coaches that I do expect to get fired at some point this season. I'm not even going to consider any of the 7 teams that already made coaching changes last season. Those 7 teams were the Edmonton Oilers, the Minnesota Wild, the St. Louis Blues, the Ottawa Senators, the New York Islanders, the LA Kings, and the New Jersey Devils. The reason I'm not even considering any of those teams is because we rarely ever see a team make a coaching change in back-to-back seasons. So with that in mind, the first coach that comes to my mind is someone we already talked about earlier in this video, and that is Andrew Brunette of the Nashville Predators. Again, I'm not saying it's Andrew Brunette's fault Nashville currently finds themselves in the basement of the NHL. well. But for a team that expected to be a contender coming into the season, how long are they going to let this go before they just try to make a change of some kind? And usually the first change we see a team make when they want to shake things up is the head coach. So I think Andrew Brunette is probably going to get fired at some point if Nashville doesn't turn this around. Some people have been throwing out the idea of Boston potentially firing Jim Montgomery. I can't see it happening, at least for a while. Sure, they've been pretty disappointing to start the season, but it's not like they're, the worst team in the league. They're just 6-7-1. They're one game under 500. I think Jim Montgomery has earned the right to have a pretty long leash. If the Bruins are still under 500, say 2 months from now, then maybe then they consider making a coaching change. But to be honest, I feel like they're going to have things turned around by then, so I don't think Montgomery's fired this season. Somebody else that comes to mind is Steve Sullivan. I could see Pittsburgh firing him at some point this season. He's been their head coach for a very long time. They've obviously missed the playoffs now in back-to-back seasons, and they haven't looked the greatest this season either. Now, that being said, the roster isn't really the greatest, so how much of that blame can you put on Steve Sullivan? But if you remember when Sullivan was brought in as Penguins head coach, they turned things around immediately and rattled off 2 consecutive Stanley Cups, so maybe just for the sake of shaking things up and hoping something like that can happen again, they make a coaching change. Other than that, though, nobody really comes to mind. So let's say if this was an over or under video, I think there's going to be under 4 coaches fired this season. I feel like we're only going to get a couple. This next hot take comes from Blues2's King, who says McDavid won't be considered the best player in the NHL by the end of the season. No matter what kind of season he ends up having, I would probably still view him as the best player in the NHL, but I do feel like even right now, there's an argument to be made against it, and the only other 2 players I think you can make the case for as the best player in the NHL over McDavid are Nathan MacKinnon and Nikita Kucherov. Nikita Kucherov obviously led the league in scoring last season, won the Art Ross Trophy like McDavid, 100 assists, just an otherworldly type of year, and Nathan MacKinnon obviously won the Hart Trophy as league's MVP, and I think you can say he's probably one of the front runners to win it again so far this season. Something else I look at when comparing guys to Connor McDavid is if they're able to, up their game in the playoffs, because McDavid does. He is 3rd all-time in playoff points per game, over 1.5, which is just nutty. But then right there behind him, Nathan MacKinnon is 6th all-time in playoff points per game, and Kucherov is 13th all-time in playoff points per game. So for me, those are really the only 2 other players that you could make a valid argument are better right now than Connor McDavid or are the best players in the league. The next hot take we have comes from Zach, who says Montreal will make the playoffs before Detroit, Ottawa, and Buffalo. Not this season, just the first of those 4 to come out of the rebuild. I think Montreal has a very bright future, but I really just don't see how this happens. I actually think Ottawa is going to make the playoffs this season. I feel like they've played a lot better than their 6-6 record shows. But even if the Sens do miss the playoffs this season, I still don't think Montreal's a playoff team next season. I feel like they're probably 2 years away from being a legit playoff contender. And if by then still not one of Buffalo, Detroit, or Ottawa have gotten back into the playoffs, that would be pretty insane. The next hot take we have comes from Golf Legends, who says the Utah Hockey Club makes the playoffs in a wild card position. I honestly don't even think this is all that bold. Coming into the season, I feel like a lot of people figured that they might be a team that's in the thick of the wild card hunt right up until the end of the season. And although they've had a bit of an up and down season so far already, they've definitely been pretty streaky. They are only 1 point out of that second wild card spot, and I'm expecting them to hang around that range and be in the wild card race all season long. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if they do end up getting one of those spots. Moving on now to the next hot take. This one comes from Road to NHL, who says Kirill Kaprizov wins/comes in second for the Hart. If the season ended today, I definitely think Kirill Kaprizov would have to be one of the 3 nominees for the Hart Trophy. The only players in the NHL this season so far with more points than Kaprizov are Kucherov, Makar, and MacKinnon, and Kaprizov's insane production has spearheaded Minnesota to an 8-2-2 record. Obviously, there's other players on Minnesota doing really well, but he's leading the charge right now for them, and that's a team that I don't really think many people expected to make the playoffs this year. So if he's able to keep up this kind of production and, finish with 120 plus points and Minnesota makes the playoffs, especially in a divisional seed, then I could definitely see this happening. And now finally, the last hot take of the video comes from Samuel Paradis, who says the Penguins finally rebuild, trading one of Crosby or Malkin. People have been talking about this for years now, and until I actually see news break of them trading one of those guys, I just don't think it's going to happen, especially especially after Sidney Crosby signed an extension. If I had to make a prediction, I would say both Malkin and Crosby end up being Penguin lifers and they never play for another team. I hope I'm wrong though, because it would be pretty fascinating to see what a Crosby or Malkin trade would look like at this stage in their careers. You have to imagine Pittsburgh would only trade them somewhere that they want to go, so it would also be pretty interesting to see if there would be any teams out there they would actually be willing to go and play for other than Pittsburgh. So that is going to wrap up today's video, reacting to some of your guys' hot takes based on what we've seen so far this NHL season. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, huge shout out and thank you to each and every one of you who left a comment on the post. You guys all make these interactive videos so much fun for me to do, and if you made it all this way to the end of the video and you ended up enjoying yourself, please remember to leave a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does actually help with the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.